Welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast. Our goal is to help you, the technology professional, accelerate your career progression, increase your job satisfaction, and be more effective in your existing role.
We want to bring listeners like you the career advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers.
I'm John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, sharing co-host duties with Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_.
We're two former IT operations guys who have moved on to pre-sales roles with technology vendors. We have our opinions, but we also like to highlight the journeys of others and see what we can learn from them.
We'd also like to ask for your feedback to make this a conversation, not a one-way broadcast. Email us at nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com or DM us at nerdjourney on Twitter. So come join us on our nerd journey.
Let's take a trip. Episode 283. How could the skills from being a video game tester help someone later in their technical career? Jason Belk is a senior technical advocate at Cisco focused on the Cisco learning and certification programs. And as a young man, Jason wanted a career in the video game industry. In this part one of our discussion with Jason, you'll hear how exposure to corporate culture at an early age gave him a solidified understanding of what he wanted his personal priorities to be and how much work stress was going to be acceptable in his life. And that definitely affected some of his future career decisions. In addition to that, we'll talk about technical certifications. Why did Jason get his CCNA in the first place? How can you, as a listener, decide on an area of certification if you're not sure? And how does the curriculum for certifications get reviewed and updated? And one more thing. How can we get more talent into the technology industry? How do you do it? And whose responsibility is it, actually? Let's get you to part one of our discussion with Jason Belk. Jason Belk, welcome to Nerd Journey.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Can you start by telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do, please?
Sure. I'm Jason Belk. I'm a senior technical advocate with Cisco's learning and certifications. But at a high level, it's a mixture of being the voice of the customer, being the person out there empathizing with the learner. And so I'm trying to be a constant learner myself and giving that feedback then to our product team who's building our platform for both the content, for Cisco's training for our products and skills, all that kind of fun stuff, and our certifications. And then I have other side duties in terms of building content, blogs, videos, tutorials, all kinds of fun stuff to get people interested in checking out Cisco's offerings when it comes to training and certification. Similar stuff that you see in DevRel roles, which are community building, product management, connecting with other business units, getting stakeholders, all that kind of fun stuff. But I'd say for probably people in your audience, the most important part is Cisco learning certifications and trying to be a constant learner.
And when we say DevRel, that's developer relations, right?
Yes. This is my second job in developer relations. So developer relations is a newer iteration of what people have traditionally seen as a technical marketing engineer type role, known often as a TME for short, who would go along with the product teams when they're selling something and say, hey, do the dog and pony show and say, this is why it's so cool. We built the demos. We showed you the use cases. We're making the product a reality and showing you the art of the possible. And also hopefully some of the things that you'll run into that you need to be aware of. So that is historically what a TME has been known for, but I'd say in the past 10 years, give or take, there's been an evolution of that role. You still see TMEs out there doing a great job, but I think there's been a need in the industry for having more, relevance to being in the boots of the customer and bringing that feedback back into the product team, and also stitching that all together through community building, content creation, accountability for documentation, for user experience, and all that kind of stuff. And so this is my second role doing that. Rather than just one specific product, Cisco Learning Certifications is services. I mean, we are known across the industry for that type of stuff. And so my expertise, I don't know everything in Cisco, but I have enough expertise to be able to talk hopefully intelligently about things that are relevant to our customers. And so my previous job, I had expertise in one product, and I was doing that for one product, which was Cisco's Network Services Orchestrator, a service provider automation product that I'd built up expertise in, and I still love the product. When I came into that role, it was my first DevRel role. I was in the NSO product team, so my manager was the product manager for the product. I was in their team meetings where they were talking about the vision of, okay, here's the features we want to release, here's the concerns customers have, here's the things we like and all that kind of stuff. And I was in those meetings, but I was given the directive of improving that user experience. So over my time in that role, I transformed the documentation from, let's say, was rudimentary, and now it's, I think, on par with its competitors, even better than a lot of the other stuff out there that are trying to do similar things, where we built a developer center where I was working with contractors who were developing the content, but I was giving them directions. Okay, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for network engineering use cases where we're trying to teach data modeling language using network engineering relevant situations so that it's not just going over their head like the software engineering type documentation had before. So that was my previous role. Now in my current role for Cisco Learning Certifications, it's required a bit more of me getting used to all of the ins and outs of our portfolio, because going from one product to a litany of certifications and even a bigger litany of trainings for all of our products, I can't be the master of everything, but it's one of those 80-20 rules. Like I know CCNA, I know CCNP, I know our networking core stuff. I was in network operations myself. And so I can relate to that network operations engineer. I got my CCNA to get into the industry. And so that's where my relevance comes in, is I'm trying to make sure everything we do, and it's a journey. I'm not saying we're where we need to be, but we're better than where we were when I joined the team 2 or 3 years ago, is turning our public-facing presence into an empathetic learning experience for everybody who's either already in a Cisco-related career or looking to get into it. Maybe I'm in the medical field and want to switch careers and I don't know where to start, stuff like that. That gives you the 10,000-foot view of what is DevRel, what is my current role, how did I get to that current role, but there's a whole lot of other things that fed into that from where my career's gone.
Especially that move from a specialty to a more general role. That's something we can dig into as well. But before we do that, let's roll back to the beginning.
Sure.
Because I think in the beginning, you studied computer science in school. What prompted that interest?
I originally picked computer science because I wanted to be in the video game industry. Like every young person who's a kind of a nerd, there's a lot of people like us who played Halo, Counter-Strike. I want to play video games for a living. And so I got into college doing computer science. I knew I was good at computers, but I wasn't the best. My freshman year summer, I got a huge amount of experience in terms of what it means to work in corporate life. So as you know, a 19-year-old person in the Silicon Valley, like you have these big aspirations, like I'm going to change the world. And then you realize, oh, there's like these big companies and they have processes and they have expectations and they have cultures, like things that you don't think about when you're just picking a degree and trying to figure out what to do. And so I was definitely very impressed with Electronic Arts in terms of a business. Like they're able to execute consistently for a long time. But the culture for the team that I joined was just not maintaining healthy work-life boundaries and mental health boundaries that I wanted to have for the rest of my life. So I'm like, well, I want to be in tech, but I don't want to burn myself out, because I was working nights, weekends, 12, 14 hours a day, week after week after week, all summer. The anecdotal feedback I know from other people in the industries that's fairly common for a lot of gaming industry folk is that there's so much passion for things that they're working on that the people who are involved in those companies want to put in the extra hours, and that's their priorities. And for me, that was not my priority. My priority was number one, my family. Number two, my community around me. So friends, family, church, and stuff like that. Number three was job. So I'm still going to execute and do my job well, but I don't want to be doing 14, 16 hours a week, 7 days a week on the regular.
Oh, sure.
I know there's big deadlines that come up, and I'm willing to put in the time for that. And I've done that over my career and been successful with that. But I think one thing that I learned very early on was like, I need to find somewhere that not only does something I'm passionate about, but also treats me in a way that I'm expecting the company to be handling the mental health and work-life balance.
100%. And I'm glad that you understood that from such a young age, because I think many of us find that out the hard way. Just to break it down a little bit, what was involved in video game testing? Are you just playing a bunch of scenarios on there? Are you actually testing the code? What is the tactical implementation of that? What did that look like?
So when I applied for the position originally, I was applying for a software engineering internship because I was like, I'm a computer science major. I want to go to college. I'll definitely get this. I didn't hear back for 2 months. I was like, well, I want to do something this summer. And so I applied for the game testing position, which basically you just have to have a high school degree. The expectations for the workers there were, critical thinking, documentation. We had a work computer on our desk that we had a bug tracking software where we were given the expectations, okay, this is how you're going to categorize the different errors that you're working with. And each day we were given directives on whatever part of the software that was going to be released soon. So they say, okay, we just made some major changes on the second to last level. We need everyone to do that today. or that they might say, we need half you do this, half do that. So they would kind of delegate each day and let us know what parts of the game they wanted us to focus on. When you first sit down, they just want you to play through the game a couple times to get used to it. And then if they didn't have any specific directives from engineering team, that we would just be doing a full playthrough, trying to break stuff, basically.
And was there an element of documentation in terms of, okay, this was successful, or I ran across this bug and here's what happened?
For that side, we were definitely looking for both slowdowns or visual glitches or obviously a game crash. And then once you experienced one of those issues, then you'd need to build your steps to reproduce that issue. And so from there, you're like, okay, can I reproduce this every time? Is it half the time? The hardest ones were the ones where you had to play through the entire game and it only showed up if you played through the entire game. Because like, if you think about it, the way the software runs typically as a user, you're not loading in level 7. You're starting at the beginning, you're going through all the way through. And then some of those issues are like, okay, maybe the memory didn't get transferred correctly from one level to the next. And you do that 7 levels deep and then suddenly you have an issue. So I'd say there's also those types of components where it gave me a critical thinking, reproducing errors mindset that then I think set me up to succeed for the next job, which I got through the university just kind of by happenstance. Walking around the university library, I saw my dad and I were looking at the really impressive Santa Clara Library book system. They have an automated book system, moving books around with this mechanical arm. And this older gentleman came up to me, he was friendly, asked how we're doing, and then told me I was doing computer science. He's like, how would you like to join our team for IT student services and help fix student laptops? I'm like, I could use some more money, and that sounds interesting. Sure. I mean, whenever I see an opportunity come to me, if it's reasonable and I have the time for it, whether that's coffee with somebody or a potential job opportunity, I never shoot them down outright. Just say, let's hear how it goes. And that actually helped set up one of the things for the rest of my career.
Okay, before we dig into that piece, I want to go back just for a second on the game testing. When you initially started documenting and communicating where you would run into these problems that people needed to fix at Electronic Arts, was your original communication maybe not good enough or not specific enough? Did you have to learn to communicate differently because of what information the people who needed to fix the problem were expecting?
I think if I wasn't already a strong writer, I would have needed it to be. So knowing myself now, I'm a very precise person. I'm a very articulate person, at least in writing. And I think that was a strong benefit coming into that type of role. But I know other people who might not read as many books and get educated through that way or do a lot of text messaging or sloppy in their grammar and things like that. I could see that definitely being a barrier to entry for some people. I think no matter what job you're in, if it involves other people and you're not physically around them 24/7, there's going to be some level of communication that needs to take place. And it's gotten to the point now, I've been full-time remote since 2017, and I've gotten so used to communicating expectations, communicating deliverables, communicating what I'm struggling with, what I need to get done, that's been a huge boon to my career as well, to be able to now work full-time remote. And so, yeah, to answer your question directly, I don't feel like the job itself necessarily gave me the skills, but it gave me an opportunity to use those skills and kind of refine them in a corporate environment.
Go back for just a second before we move forward to the behaviors and actions you noticed your coworkers exhibiting at EA that were indicators and red flags of this isn't the kind of culture I want to work in someday.
There wasn't I feel like any toxic behavior in terms of individual people saying things that were inappropriate or mean or anything like that. I think it was more of just the vision that they had bought into was we're all in this together and we need to get this thing out the door and make it the best thing possible. And I agree with all those statements, but the way that was executed was we need to put in extra hours as much as possible. And it might have been different on the engineering side, but like I said, when I talk to other people about the gaming industry more generally, I feel like that's pretty common, is that there's such an excitement about just being a part of something famous and something cool. And this might be true for other industries as well, but it's just people want to make work the number one priority in their life permanently. And then you just go from project to project to project, and then suddenly you retire and they're like, oh, where did everybody else go around me? All my relationships have atrophied. All of my physical health has atrophied. And so I think it's one of those things where for some people, that's a cost they're willing to make because they love their work so much. But I think for me, knowing myself, I love my work, but it's definitely not 100% of what I do.
Yeah. Well, that's a great message to share right now. I know a lot of folks are having to work extra hours. It seems like in today's industry where we're seeing companies cut back on staff here and there. Let's go forward to the job with IT student services. You had this unexpected opportunity come your way, and you mentioned you are always open to at least having a conversation, seeing what it's about. Is this a new direction I want to go? What were some of the things you had to do that you really enjoyed when you worked in IT student services?
I think the things that come to mind for me is first, the leaders of the team that I was working with, Michael, who was the non-student person running the organization. He was previously in the military, so he had good leadership training skills. Even though we were only there for a few years, then we'd leave, and the next group would come in when we leave, and all that kind of cycle, you'd think that you'd kind of get pessimistic and not invest in people and just kind of, but every single person that was on his team, he was concerned about their development. He was concerned about their happiness. He was concerned about them growing both in their technical skills and their presentation skills, and like all these things that I'm sure came out of the military as well as his own personality. And for me, that was huge, just having a manager who really cared about me and modeled good leadership skills and gave us opportunities to do things that were beyond our reach, but not so far beyond that we didn't have the support to be able to grow into it. When I joined that team, like I defragged my hard drive and maybe built my own desktop as a high schooler for gaming, but I was just like following instructions. But I didn't know how to remove viruses or reformat hard drives or take out a hard drive. But like he had the senior members of the team like mentor with the junior members of the team. So they're like, oh, we had a laptop come in that we need to replace the hard drive. And so it's like, Jason, why don't you come over here and like watch how it's done? Here's the screwdrivers. This is an HP. This is where the hard drive is. Or for viruses, And also I think the other component is like setting proper boundaries for the customer side of things, where if a customer had a reasonable request, here's my laptop, it has viruses, yes, we're going to fix it. But if the customer was treating us unprofessionally, because students can be in all different states of mind and have different social skills. If they were yelling at us, if they were being mean to us, if they were, escalating things unnecessarily, he would have our back, and he would be very firm and escalate things on his side as needed as well.
In terms of what your focus was in computer science and the work you were doing in IT student services, did you find that there was a pretty decent overlap of conceptual knowledge, or did you feel like there was something you wanted to be different about the work you were doing because you were focused on computer science and maybe more programming and development?
I actually felt like my time in IT student services was more useful than most of the classes. No shade on the professors doing the best they can, but I think just the curriculum and the way it's structured is supposed to give you a little bit of everything, especially at an undergraduate level. You walk in with no experience and you walk out with enough experience to hopefully start a job somewhere. And also for computer science specifically, there's a lot of upper division math classes you have to take. And so I'm, learning differentials and abstract math and topographies, and on top of everything else that's the computer science of C++, Java, web languages, all these things that I've never worked in an environment. I don't know which one of these are relevant. I don't know which one of them are going to be easier or harder to do in an actual use case. You have your class projects and things like that, where I felt like in my student position, like it was very clear what things worked and what things didn't work, because like we see the customer experience immediately. It's like, okay, now that I know how to physically remove a hard drive and reinstall Windows, I have a skill that every time this comes up, I can now apply that skill to that situation. Where it's like now, because I know assembly language, it can move registers on bits and things like that, or electrical engineering classes, where I felt like it was preparing me for careers that I had no interest in.
And don't forget your push and pop when it comes to assembly language.
That's the one class I had to take twice. It was brutal.
It's a hard one. I like the focus on a series of steps or a process, because I think that's the next iteration of what you liked about the video game testing. I know that if I test it in this manner, I can find all the bugs. I need to play all the levels, just like you need to play all the levels when you learn how to reinstall an operating system on a hard drive, format it, and set it up appropriately. I feel like that is a skill that can be applied to anything. You're looking at what's the process from start to finish, what's my checklist, what are my series of steps. If you go into a new area seeking to try and do that, then you'll have these repeatable playbooks as you go through it. Did you find yourself continuing that pattern all the way into what you do now?
Definitely. I think the way in which those checklists happen has become less and less formal over the years as I've kind of internalized my own checklists for how I operate. But it gives me like a sense of comfort where I'm given a situation. Like, for example, I hadn't done conference talks up until a few years ago, even though that's like a big part of my job now in DevRel. And so when I was an instructor at Network to Code a few years back before I did the DevRel, like that gave me the skills to be like, okay, I can build a class curriculum. And I was just presenting and doing my best to communicate these different technical concepts and doing that a lot. But like after I'd gotten used to getting my checklists for building my course curriculum and executing that course curriculum, which would be a mixture of going through my slides and having like a mental flow of like, okay, I'm talking through, this is what I'm going to say, this is what I'm going to say. And if I know the material enough, I don't need to necessarily practice every word because I can just speak off the cuff based on my knowledge of the domain. And so that's one part of the checklist. The other part would be the technical demo side. So I always try as much as possible to demonstrate what I'm working on step by step, explaining all of the assumptions. For those classes, that would be bringing up the terminal, bringing up VS Code, showing them Ansible playbooks, showing them Python, showing them Cisco commands being pushed to network devices, stuff like that. Taking those skills of understanding the flow of a presentation, understanding the flow of a demo, and connecting them, then recontextualizing that for conference talks, where it's basically the same thing, but instead of talking for 8 hours, you're talking for 45 minutes. And that helped me a lot because before I taught a lot of classes, I didn't really have the confidence to know the vibes I would need and the mental checklists I would need to just walk up on stage and start talking.
Certainly. Well, and you said your manager at IT Student Services even was focused on having people do presentations. Can you tell us a little bit about what that entailed and how that got you some experience that you then built upon?
Yeah, it was mixed in, but it was definitely not a majority of our time. So he had formal training times for our team, like twice a year, at least, if I remember, where he would have different members of the staff, especially the senior ones, present what they were learning. And since we were getting new people coming in all the time, be like, okay, I'm going to do a presentation on how you remove viruses from your laptop. And same type of thing, that they would do a demo. They would have a laptop that was recently from the queue, and then they would go through the process. So basically taking situations that people would typically run into and then asking senior members of the team to teach the junior members of the team and using that as an exercise in presentation skills. And he would give us some coaching beforehand in terms of making sure we understood the flow and we knew what to communicate.
I know different people have different thoughts on whether they're afraid of, enjoy, or somewhere in the middle when it comes to public speaking. And by public speaking, I mean anything from having to talk to a group of people that are on the same team as you or senior to you, all the way up to conference talks and keynotes. So for you, that first time you got asked to do this, what was your immediate sentiment and feeling?
Just utter fear, because it's one of those things where I think I just had a mental block in terms of every time I've done a presentation, like I'm excited to share the content, but as an introvert, as someone who's not inherently charismatic, it requires a lot of habits to be formed, a lot of confidence to be built. And that early in my career, I didn't have either of those things. So looking back at my presentations, like I have a recording from my first start at Cisco. I did a presentation class and listening to myself, I'm like, I can see the similarities, but like I just a nervous wreck, stuttering all the time. And like I was able to communicate the ideas, but it was a lot more based on the flashcards I had in front of me rather than feeling comfortable and just chatting about what we're working on.
And your nervousness, was that more from being afraid you wouldn't be able to answer questions, not knowing the subject material well enough, or being heckled by the audience? I think most people are afraid, technical people, that they won't be able to answer all the questions, and that makes them really, really antsy.
I think it's just also an irrational fear of when you're standing up there and everyone's looking at you, you're like, oh, I'm the one who has to command the attention and deliver an experience is what they're expecting. So I guess meeting expectations. I think one of the big things that shifted my mindset for that was realizing that the people in the audience want you to succeed, that they don't come to the presentation because they want to see you fail. They don't come to the presentation because they want to see someone who's nervous and confused and stuttering. Like those things can happen. We all have bad days, but they come to the presentation because they're eager to learn something new. They're eager to be entertained. They're eager to have an experience where it can't be replicated. We can all watch videos on almost any topic today. If we're doing anything live and in person, there's something special about that still that we can't replicate with technology. And I think for me, like understanding the specialness of being in person with somebody or being recorded for that manner, and taking that responsibility as a joy and saying, I'm here. They want to hear what I'm saying. They want me to succeed. And if I know what I'm talking about, I'll just talk as if I'm talking to that one person and then talk to the next person, just kind of focusing on one person at a time rather than the crowd as this big thing that I'm trying to please all at once. Because you're going to have people in the crowd who are having a bad day, who maybe just have a natural face that doesn't look very happy. And if you're getting psyched out because somebody's frowning or looking confused, like you want to pick up on some of those cues, like, oh, maybe I should like explain that concept again. But on the other hand, you can't let one or two lemons in the audience get you so rattled that you're unable to finish what you wanted to talk about.
And if people listening to this are in the camp of, I'm really hesitant to do any kind of presentation, where would you recommend they start?
A great place to start is in like the smallest splash radius of damage, where if you mess up, like you're not going to limit your career. So you don't want to sign up for a presentation with your SVP and then you have to go back down into the cages. And I'd say two low splash areas would be one, just your team. So if you're on an IT team and you have other engineers and you're curious about something, or you have some expertise that other people don't have. I definitely did that when I was in the IT team for that situation. Other ones where it's like I'm learning something and I'm sharing what I'm learning in a verbal form. And before the verbal form, I'd say you can do it in the written form too to help build up your confidence. Because like at least for me, I'm a lot stronger in my writing skills than I'm in my speaking skills. So a lot of times the things that I am comfortable in speaking on, I've already spent a lot of time thinking about because I had a written version of that same presentation where I've solidified my thoughts in such a way that they have a coherence to them, where the process of me synthesizing all those thoughts into a written form to communicate to someone else in a teaching manner gives me the tool to be able to then communicate that to other people. So I'd say your team is one situation. Another one might be local meetups. Wherever you are in the world, you might not have a meetup specifically for your niche, but there's probably a meetup just for tech people in general, or even just business people. I'm in Reno, not a huge city, but I went last night, had a great time at a local meetup, and I didn't do a talk, but they do often have talks at those types of meetups where it's just like people who want to meet with other technical people.
Yeah, meetup.com. I mean, there's so many different categories and types of meetup groups that you mentioned, even if it's not focused on technology, the practice of communicating. And I like your focus on the writing, the synthesizing your thoughts, getting them together so that you've formulated a well thought out checklist and process for your presentations. At some point, you eventually got to work for Cisco. Can you tell us how that came to be from your IT student services and where the getting certified comes into play?
Sure. I had a good friend who actually was a few years ahead of me in school in computer engineering, and he had already had 2 internships at Cisco and was going to graduate soon and work there full time. And so he was volunteering as part of their university recruitment. And so he's like, hey, you should come work for Cisco. I never heard of them, didn't know what they did, but I looked him up. I was like, oh, it seems kind of cool. Internet stuff, like internet's kind of a big deal. And he was really happy with the company culture and like coming out of electronic arts. That was a big thing for me. Like, okay, I want to go to a company that values its people. And I saw an internship opening for IT as an analyst, and they had an engineering one as well. But even though I had a computer science undergrad, I didn't feel confident in my coding skills. I was passing my classes, but I knew I didn't want to sit in a room all day and deal with C++ pointers and arrays and all that kind of stuff. But I knew I wanted to do technical stuff. In this interview for this position, the lady asked me, who eventually became my manager, she said, I see you're a computer science major. Do you consider yourself a strong coder? And I paused and she said, this isn't going to make or break the interview. I'm just trying to figure out where to place you. I said, well, I understand what's going on, but I feel like I'm better in positions where I'm explaining the technology and having to translate it between people who are technical and not technical. And so I can read the code, I can understand what's going on, but like if you ask me to build the next iPhone app, that's probably not going to be my strength. And that can help set me up in terms of just being honest with her where I was at. And she placed me in her team, which was called the Cisco on Cisco team, where it was a bunch of people who were doing exactly that. They were telling the stories of how Cisco was using its own technology inside Cisco. So that's why they call it Cisco on Cisco. So how we used our networking equipment, how we used our collaboration equipment, how we used our data center equipment, and the pros, the cons as IT employees, the struggles, the benefits. And so our customers can relate because we're IT organization within a company that sells IT products. And so we're trying to relate to them in that way. I joined that team as an IT analyst. Actually, after my internship, I came back full time and I was doing a lot of things like Excel spreadsheets, pivot tables based on how our top experts were meeting customers. And then these spreadsheets were saying what customers they met, the CSAT scores, customer satisfaction. And helping connect the dots for the value for what we're doing. But it also gave me exposure. I would shadow along for a lot of these presentations where they're meeting customers. So I would sit next to these people who had kids my age, effectively, and they were presenting on these technologies. I knew enough to be dangerous for my undergrad, but like there's so much to IT technology that is not covered in the course curriculum as products continually come out and as technology evolves, that I was just trying to absorb it all up. And it gave me enough context then to be like, I want to actually go into networking. Like I really enjoyed my networking class in my undergrad. I was a great professor with that. And that's one of the things that also kind of led me towards Cisco and being empathetic towards that. I had a friend that was also hired from the same university as a new hire, was in the networking team. So he went to San Jose State. I went to Santa Clara University. He did computer engineering also. And he was a network engineer within their team. And so I asked my manager, I was like, hey, I'm interested in eventually moving over to this team and getting more technical. So I pursued my CCNA, my Cisco Certified Network Associate, and that helped get my foot in the door to be able to then transfer to the other team.
When you were on the calls with the people from the Cisco and Cisco team, they were communicating what Cisco's internal technical teams do to use the Cisco technology. But these were also the people who were hands-on with the technology as well, right? They're not only pressing the buttons, but they're able to share with someone else who's a technologist what they're doing, what they're working on, how it translated into success, value, the problems they ran into along the way.
Exactly. So yeah, it wasn't so much like product demonstrations. It was more a layer of abstraction where they were giving outcomes. So they were saying, we use Cisco UCS to reduce our costs by X, Y, and Z by implementing these features, stuff like that.
Got it. Were you at all interacting with the end customers of Cisco as part of that, or is it mainly just fly on the wall shadowing?
I didn't have enough experience to talk intelligently about the technologies. I think I might have had one presentation I did. It was kind of a low-hanging fruit one, but I did have opportunities to travel with that. Like I actually got to go to Sao Paulo, Brazil, Rio de Janeiro with that team for a Cisco event and other Cisco Lives and be the person at the booth answering questions for customers who are coming up for our team. So there's definitely customer-facing situations, at least an introductory level understanding of what we were doing and the impact we were making.
Yeah. I mean, I see working the booth as some public speaking experience, honestly. Going and having a conversation about the work the team was doing with a customer, answering the questions, formulating what you should say. It's a dynamic dialogue, but it's still, to me, public speaking in a lot of ways.
Oh, for sure. It's also another good, safe place people get practice, where I think someone comes up to the booth and you fumble over yourself, they'll just kind of walk away and that's it. If your company has opportunity to be on booth duty and you haven't done public speaking, that could be another good way to get some practice in.
For sure. So back to the certification, you were more interested in being a network engineer and what that entailed. You wanted to be more hands-on with the technology. So you pursued a certification. I'm really curious as to how did you know what to pick? And then what was it like working through that kind of at the same time where maybe you were not a network engineer?
Since I was at Cisco, it helped that I knew I wanted to get the Cisco certification. I wasn't like, oh, what are all the other certifications out there? So I was like, okay, I want to get Cisco certification. And I knew people on the team that had certifications already. So people had associate level, professional level certifications, the people I was working with, and they talked about that. And they knew I was early in career, so they recommended that to me as well. There was one person in particular, Cyrus, who went out of his way to really mentor us. I would go up to their team. We were in the same building on different floors. So I'd go up there 2 or 3 days a week sometimes. And I would just sit in their space and just listen to the work that was going on, sit in the meetings, watch them do troubleshooting, and just, even if I didn't have access to anything, just experience what was going on. And then as Cyrus had time, he would go up and whiteboard things. So you go, okay, I'm going to explain subnetting. And I'm going to go up and then now have you go up there and show me how to do subnetting. And so it's stuff like that where you have somebody who is invested in your future and in that team and is able to then teach and communicate and kind of give you that pathway. And also having a peer alongside me so it's not like I'm the only person doing it.
100%. I love that you had that. Just like the manager at IT Student Services was so concerned about giving people additional skills, building those up, even though the team was going to rotate. Certainly, Cyrus and the people around him on that team knew that, as an intern, you would eventually leave the team too, but they took the time to share that knowledge with you. I love that. As you started working toward the CCNA, how did your building of checklists and steps and writing communication skills translate into learning that material?
I think for me, the hardest thing was just finding at the time the resources that were outside the book, because I had like the official book and I was going through that. But since I had never worked on a network device, barely knew how to use a terminal, like there's just a lot of small skills that you kind of need along the way in terms of like, oh, like what does the console cable do? Or, all the different things that come in terms of like the hardware side as well. For me, the checklist was finding material that was hands-on and demo heavy, because the book would give me the concepts. Okay, this is what OSPF is. This is what routing versus switching, VLANs, VTP, things like that, where you need your vegetables to be in your system before you can start messing around with the actual features. And I found a course online. I don't think he's an active teacher anymore. Chris Bryant. I really enjoyed it because he had a lot of demo heavy stuff. For us at Cisco Learning Certifications, we have Cisco U, where we have CCNA courses, CCNP courses, DevNet Associate, DevNet Professional. So that's kind of where my plug comes in, and saying there are a lot of good instructors out there in Cisco and outside of Cisco. I'm not going to plug any of the ones outside of Cisco on this particular call, but I think people can find them without too much effort. And I will say that like having someone who's able to demonstrate the skills and explain every step of the process was really critical for me, because I felt like it wasn't really clicking when I was just reading the book. And I was like, okay, this is what the terminal looks like. But once I was able to get the Boson software and the packet tracer and being able to actually play around with the prompt, and one of the things that Chris Bryant taught me in that class that helped me a lot was just getting the muscle memory in. I think I didn't realize how much of it was just when you're in the test, you can't be sitting around remembering what the command is. You need to be, you can do the question mark and kind of refresh your memory really quick. But when you're in a Cisco exam, there's no back button. Every question is just moving forward. And at least at that time, the CCNA had a lab portion where you actually had to pull up a terminal, execute commands, troubleshoot, and configure. You need to know what you're doing when you're given those questions to be able to explore and understand where those problems are and then be able to solve them. I think access both to an instructor who was walking through those scenarios, encouraging me to do that myself, and then having the proper tools to be able to get the muscle memory and the comfort with the technology. Where the last thing I'll point out is that I wish they had it back then, but now we have something called Cisco CML, Cisco Modeling Labs, in addition to Packet Tracer, where anybody with a moderately modern laptop can set up virtual devices with virtual PCs, virtual routers, virtual switches, and you can import these topologies using something called a YAML file, where it basically lists out the connections and lists out the IP addresses and spins up these devices for you, where historically speaking, that required, I feel like, a lot more barrier to entry for new people, where now that's all virtualized. Yeah, you lose out on some of the physical hardware stuff of like the blinking lights and understand where things go, but you'll get that eventually. And it kind of changed per hardware platform. Being able to have access to Packet Tracer and CML, for me, is a game changer in terms of learning, where anybody, anywhere in the world that has access to a computer and an internet connection, I think you can get CML for $100 or something like that. It's not nothing, but it's also a lot cheaper than going out there and buying even used Cisco switches on eBay. I think are a couple $100 for just one.
Well, it's a low barrier of entry and a great resource that we'll make sure to put in the show notes for people listening to this. I know that as our technology landscape continues to shift, the certification landscape continues to shift too. And my opinion is that even within every vendor's technology, or even ones from like the Linux Foundation or the FinOps Foundation, there are many ways you could go. So if you were giving a listener advice who they felt like certification was something that would help them, how do they decide which one to pursue?
I would say if you have no preference, pick ones that are relevant to the career you want to be in. Even if you're not there right now. Like I was doing Excel spreadsheets and I was like, networking just seems really cool. The terminal, you feel like a hacker. Like there's certain aesthetics that you don't talk about like in books, but it's just kind of fun to like feel like you understand the computer at a deeper level. But that doesn't have to be just for networking. I think security certifications also fall into that, where you could be doing a lot of things in the terminal. So for me, I knew people in that field. So it was one of those things where the relationships helped define the direction I was going, where I had these mentors, I had these people in teams that I wanted to go into, where if it had been a security team or a database team or something else where someone else was able to be that mentor for you, my career might have been different. So I'd say evaluate the relationships you have in your life and the people you know who are doing these types of jobs, or maybe the opportunities you have to connect with people. That's one component. And I'd say another one is like look online at jobs, what certifications they're expecting. I know there's CompTIA Plus, another networking certification, but that's more for like help desk stuff. Still a great certification in terms of if you don't know anything about networking, CCNA might be a little too much for you to get started. You kind of want to build your momentum somewhere. So I'd say that's one thing, is picking a certification where if you haven't done anything in tech before, starting small, and that might just be a Coursera. Go on Coursera, go on Udemy, find something that is relevant to the direction you want to go in, and see if it's interesting. Like if you're sitting in a class about JavaScript and really struggling to understand and feeling like this really isn't for me, maybe it's not for you. Maybe it's just a bad instructor. So give another class a try, and if that doesn't work, maybe that's not a technology I want to invest more time in. So I'd say, do you have the passion? Do you have the interest? Do you have the relationships? And are you going to be able to make money with it? Doing some research and looking at what technologies are growing, which ones are flattening off or dying. For example, Python's big and it's continuing to get big. Go is getting bigger. And for networking, I think that's a little more of a complicated issue, because the network engineering position is in a place of flux, where cloud disrupted networking heavily in the past 10 plus years. But IT organizations don't change very quickly, and they don't change that much. So no matter how much the startups want to be shouting from the rooftops how they're doing DevOps, all the things with AWS, for every one of those people, there's 100 people behind the scenes who are sitting in a large bank pushing around configuration files from devices that are 20 years old. Realize that not every career is going to be doing the latest and greatest technology, but you want to be building skills, getting certified on technologies that are relevant to where the direction is going. And also networking itself is foundational to so many other areas. If you understand networking, it helps you understand security. It helps you definitely understand cloud much better than a lot of people.
I love the meshing together of something you're interested in, something that's relevant, and something you can get paid for, that there's actually a demand for. For companies that create these certifications and certification programs, do they often go and review that curriculum with companies in the public and private sector and use that as a measure of whether or not it needs to change? Can you give us any insight into that?
I've only been in the certification group for Cisco, so I can't speak to other organizations, but at least from our side, we have a couple different directions. One is just being the voice of the customer, me being one of those people. It's my responsibility to be out there in the community, understanding what the trends are, understanding what are the things that are not yet big enough for the rest of the industry to understand about. Like, for example, earlier this year, we updated the CCNA blueprint, which basically means the requirements of the topics that are going to be tested on to get your CCNA. I was part of those conversations, as well as other people on the team, to say, we want to include something with generative AI. What does that look like? It's so early on in this technology's hype cycle process that we don't want to ask much, but we want to ask something. And we're taking out something else that was kind of not core to everything CCNA, because they have certain areas of the blueprint that they kind of rotate through. So I'd say that's one component, is like having someone on the team, people on the team who understand what's going on in the industry and that what are the big things that are up and coming. And then I'd say the other part is understanding what are the customers actually using. Because there could be a disconnect, even like a company like Cisco, where we have all these products, all these acquisitions. It can be so big that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's going. From our end, what we have established is open lines of communication with every product team. So we have regular meetings where we're meeting with Thousand Eyes, we're meeting with Meraki, we're meeting with Catalyst Center, we're meeting with the people who are the product managers making the decisions for those teams, saying, what are the features that are coming out? What do we need to be looking out for? What do we need to be aware of? What are your priorities, and how can we align to that? But we're not letting them dictate the conversation, but we want to have that available to us as we're making that decision-making process. And each one of our certifications are on a 2-year cycle where we reevaluate. We do a minor update every year, and then we are open to a major update every 2 years, I believe. All that to say is we have established processes for regular cadence of evaluating all of our certifications. And I sit in those meetings. I've definitely given specific feedback saying, hey, that technology that's listed right there, like for example, Pup and Chef, used to be a big deal. Pup and Chef was all over the place for all the DevOps books. It was still technically on our certifications as of last year. So that was one of the things that we updated recently, where we said Pup and Chef, cool technologies, but not as relevant anymore. So we're going to do Ansible and Terraform. And those have taken more center stage in terms of what the mind share our customers are actually using.
Yeah. I love the opportunity to communicate with the product teams and keeping in mind what they're doing as you think about what the curriculum to be covered on one of these certifications is. And that allows future proofing of value for someone who is seeking the certification specifically. And I know you're passionate about increasing the number of network engineers out there. For me personally, for people listening, how can we all do our part to get more talent in network engineering?
for me, the part that I'm doing is going to those meetups, going to the conferences. That, I mean, it's part of my job, but like, I think for anybody, the social avenues you have, if you understand how those industries work, it's partially your responsibility to educate people how cool it is to work in our industry. I think other tech jobs get a lot more mind share just because they're more consumer focused, where enterprise grade software, enterprise grade, all the stuff with Cisco and Microsoft and other people like that are doing, the only people who interact with it are people who are already in that mindset. Like if you work at a big company, you've probably seen a Cisco phone. If you work at Starbucks or you work at, I don't know, other more consumer-facing brands, you oftentimes have no idea all this stuff that's going behind the scenes to make your paychecks work, to make sure that you can access the data you need for your manufacturing devices. Information technology, IT, I think a lot of people see it as a word rather than realizing information is in that word, and that information is such a big part of our society, and it's only getting bigger and bigger. You think about how much more connected we are to our environment with data and information than we were 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. We went from having Wi-Fi being a nice to have to being not even having Ethernet cables on our laptops. We went from having cell phones, we had our Motorola's that we were doing walkie-talkies and like texting using numbers, to I'm able to talk to my AI assistant, voice to text, and build a grocery list anywhere on top of a mountain. I feel like people have taken for granted so much of the transformation that's happened on the consumer side. They don't realize what's happening behind the scenes on the business side. So it's our job for people who are in these fields to let them know all the stuff that's happening behind the scenes and the job opportunities that are there. Because I think when people think of what to do for their lives or what to do for their next job or how to switch their careers, they think in respect to what they know. And what they know is primarily consumer-facing technologies. And so they're inherently limiting their options unless somebody educates them about, hey, do you know about IT? Like, it's not just the IT crowd from the TV show being nerds. Like, there's IT project managers, there's IT engineers, IT analysts. You could be doing spreadsheets, you could be doing PowerPoint slides. There's so many different directions you could take that. I think especially post-pandemic, having remote friendly be such a big part of these types of jobs where it's like, it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. I mean, your employer might care, but it should matter where you work if you're doing these types of jobs. So the underserved and less privileged people who come from backgrounds or maybe places in the country where they're not near a big company, they're not next to the Silicon Valley, they're not next to New York City or London. Yeah, it's going to be harder for you probably to get your momentum going and getting that first job. But like once you're able to get in that system, build a relationship, start getting those jobs going, I feel like it gives you an opportunity to have such a higher quality of living that it's just undervalued in our society, where people are so focused on how much money do you make? What do you do? So like seeing your job as an opportunity to provide for your family, but also do it in a way that even if people don't understand what you're doing, if you find value in the work, that's the important part.
You're right. And one of the missions of our show is to let people who are either in technology right now or looking at it understand that there are likely many more options out there for jobs that they could get with the experience they have than they even come close to realizing. Like you said, it's on us to share some of the things we're doing and are excited about with other people. And as you've demonstrated with stories from your previous experience, educate them on what that means, and here are some resources to point you in the right direction to get to that next step.
I went to a meetup last night here in Reno, and I had a great conversation with a young woman who was in the medical field as an assistant. She didn't have a medical degree. She was just doing assistant work. And she's like, I've been taking some classes on the side of community college for JavaScript. She said, my mind thinks so sequentially. I want to find the shortest path to things. I want to remove inefficiencies. And when I look at coding stuff, it excites me. And I'm like, that's great. Like have a great understanding of what you want, which is awesome. And I think she was just struggling. Do I need to be good at math to be in IT? And like having these questions that I feel like a lot of people ask that don't know anybody who's worked in it yet. And I just want to debunk those myths. They're like, no, you don't need to be good at math. No, you don't need to be good at JavaScript. But yes, you need to be willing to learn, try new things, and figure out what works, what doesn't work, and what are marketable skills. So for me, JavaScript was something that is a very confusing coding language to start with because it works in a non-sequential way where you have these processes that are being spun up and doing things in the background, where something like Python, my recommendation to her getting started was like, if you want to get into coding, try with Python instead of JavaScript, even though JavaScript is a lot more popular across all the different web frameworks and it's everywhere on the web. And that's the consumer side. People are like, oh, I understand JavaScript because it's websites and I understand that. But Python behind the scenes secretly has so many tools under its belt that make business processes more efficient. You have packages for reading in Excel files and editing them. You have ways of sending emails, of scraping websites, something called Selenium where it can pretend to be a user clicking buttons on a website for testing web pages or just for your own use. Like I used it to download inspirational messages from one of my favorite speakers. And she's like, all my projects that I'm doing, they just don't excite me or like I'm struggling to see the value in what it's creating. You need to find something that's related to your hobbies and interests that is just outside of your reach. And I think that's a really hard place when you're first beginning to know where that point is. For the one that I had created, I use Selenium, and you just go online, you find examples. And for me, I use Selenium to pull up Google Chrome, put in the URL, and manually type in the name of the message that I wanted to find and then download it. I eventually then upgrade, okay, now I want to have it find a random message for me and use a random number generator to find a page and things like that. So I would just say for her, I was like, you need to find something that's related to your hobbies that is a small enough project where you're interacting with some type of web resource and maybe extracting some information from it. I know another guy who's really into NASA and would love getting data from the different NASA APIs. So they have different ways of exposing the data from NASA on, I don't know, the different stars and distances and lights and things like that.
Did you notice the exposure to the value of teaching in Jason's story? We didn't really highlight it in our interview, but he had a manager in IT student services that he felt cared. That person placed an emphasis on members of the team teaching each other, doing presentations. This was also demonstrated by the people who mentored Jason when he wanted to become a network engineer. He mentioned Cyrus spent time whiteboarding things with him, having him teach things back. I wonder if seeing good teachers and realizing that you have a talent to communicate concepts to others makes you want to be in some kind of role that has a teaching capacity to it. For Jason, preparing for a presentation is still a checklist, one of those repeatable processes. He talked about how he thinks through the way a course will be delivered. He thinks about the presentation flow, the demo flow, making sure that he explains the assumptions along the way. And once he knew the material well enough, knew the flow, he was able to develop a conference talk, which is much shorter than a course. I would say for people listening, if you've never given a talk at a conference or even at a meetup group or to your team, start with an abstract, a high-level description of what the talk will be about, a few sentences usually. And then maybe you need to build an outline. What are the high-level points you want to make? Maybe there are 3 or 4, or the concepts that you want to cover, and that'll help you get that flow down as you start to build any kind of content that goes in there. And maybe that structure will provide some comfort and make it a little bit easier for you to put that together and then deliver it. Who better than someone who has achieved a technical certification at the company he now works for in the certification and learning area to share with us some ideas on what we should think about if we want to get certified. So is the topic interesting to you? And Jason points out it might take multiple courses or multiple passes at the content to help you determine that. The way one person explains it may not resonate as well with you as the way someone else explains it. Maybe it's video form that's the most helpful to you. Maybe it's written form. Maybe it's a combination of those two things that helps you determine, oh, this is really interesting. Oh, I'm really passionate about it. But he also talks about the relationships, asking other people in the industry. They can give you guidance on what is relevant, what's important, where should I start? Is this a certification that people want in their job descriptions today? Those relationships are something that Jason is also modeling that we can use when we're thinking of pursuing some sort of technical project. He gave the example of the young lady he met at the meetup group, and he provided guidance on where that person should start, but also what is more relevant in technology to what businesses and enterprises are using today. He encouraged using Python maybe instead of JavaScript, and gave some guidance on where maybe a small project with that could start. And I think that's great advice, something just outside your reach in an area of interest related to your hobbies. Now, I will add to that and say that if you're someone in tech who's trying to make a shift into a different role, maybe your technical project should leverage some of the content, skills in areas you know, somehow combine that with a new area you want to learn. If you can put those together, that might allow you to step slowly into a new area so that it's not quite so overwhelming. You can still pick a small project that includes a little bit of that new area meshed together with something you already know pretty well. And I think that is a way to give yourself that double check mark and ensure that maybe you'll actually do it or that it'll continue to be interesting. I remember working at a manufacturing company and having a vice president ask the question, who's in charge of safety? And he said, everyone. That was always the answer. Well, who's in charge of advocating for more talent in technology? From what I heard from that conversation, everyone. We're all responsible for generating more interest in technology jobs. Talking to people about what you do, why you chose to do it, sort of being a talent scout on the lookout for people who might be looking to get into a role that's similar to yours. How can you help them get there? How can you make them better? Just as others in the community and people in your life have hopefully made you better over the course of your professional career. It's a great start to the discussion in part 1 with Jason. We look forward to sharing part 2 with you next week.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at VJourneyman, for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.